Today's lesson is on using decimals to compare fractions, and it will cover page 6 in your Jump Math book. Question 1 asks you to write each fraction as a decimal, and then circle the decimal that is closest to the fraction. So we're going to start with step 1, writing each fraction as a decimal. 1/4 is the same as 1/4, so that is 0.25 as a decimal, right? You can think of cents, or you could write this as an equivalent fraction of 25 over 100 and then turn it into a decimal. Our second step is to circle the decimal that is closest to the fraction. So if we're looking at 0.25, which of these decimals is closest? Well, 0.2, right? So then that is what we would circle. The first part of question 2 asks you to express each fraction as a decimal and round your answer to 3 decimal places. So this is our first step. Now, I can look at 4/5, and the easiest way to turn this into a decimal is to think, okay, can I make the bottom into a power of 10? Well, yes. 5, if I multiply this by 2 over 2, gives me a fraction over 10. It gives me 8 out of 10. And I can write this as a decimal because I have 1 0, so I have one place after the decimal, and I fill that with the 8. So 4/5 is the same thing as 0.8, and then you can add 2 more zeros after it so that it goes to 3 decimal places. For 7/10, well, it's already done as a power of 10. So I need one place after the decimal, it's a 7. And then if I still need 2 more places, I just fill them in with zeros. 2/3 is going to be a little bit trickier for us, because if we look at the number 3, I can't make that into a power of 10. 3 is not a factor of 10, 100, 1,000. It just doesn't work. So instead, I'm going to use long division. So 2 divided by 3, and remember they said that we're going to go to 3 decimal places. So I'm going to put 3 zeros so I know I can stop there. 3 goes into 2 0 times, which leaves us with 2 left over. Bring down the 0. 3 goes into 26 times, which gives us 18. When we subtract, that gives us 2. Bring down the 0. It goes in 6 times. That's 18. Subtract, that gives us 2. Bring down the 0. And we can see it's going to keep being 6s. So if we were to round this to the 3rd place, so we're going to keep having 6s. If we look at the 3rd digit here, the next number, 6, tells us that we need to round up. So we're actually going to write 0.667 because we are rounding to the 3rd place. That's why we don't just keep going with 6s. The second part asks us to circle the fraction that is closest to the decimal. So 0.65, is it closer to 0.800, 0.700, or 0.667? Well, it's the 2/3, so we're then going to go and circle 2/3. Question 3 asks you to use decimal equivalents to order these fractions from greatest to least. So our first step is to come up with decimal equivalents. So if we have 5/6, we can't necessarily turn that into a power of 10 easily, right? It doesn't multiply into 10, and to get to 100, well, that'd be 60 and 40. It's not a factor of 40. So the easiest way is for us to do long division. So we need to look at 5 divided by 6. So 6 goes into 5 0 times, which gives us 5 left over. It goes into 58 times, which gives us 48, and that leaves us with 2. Then we can bring down another 0. It goes into 23 times, because that gives us 18, which leaves us with 2. Okay, now you might notice here we were left with a remainder of 2, and now we're left with a remainder of 2 again. So if this keeps happening, we know that the 3 is going to be repeating. So 6 goes into 23 times 18, that equals 2. So our remainder keeps coming as 2. It's always going to go to a 3. So this is 0.83, and the 3 is repeating. Our next number is 13 over 7, and we can actually keep doing our division. Now, we're dividing 13 by 7 because it's the numerator on the inside. So we actually will get an answer before we get to the decimal. So 7 doesn't go into 0, but it can go into 13 once. So that's 7. We have a remainder of 6. Then we bring down the 0. 7 goes into 68 times, right? So 8 times 7 is 56. That gives us 4. It goes into 48 5 times, which gives you 35. And then it can go into 57 times, which is 49, which gives you 1. Bring down the 0. Well, it goes into that once, which is 7, which gives you 3. Oh, this one's going on for quite a while. We don't see a pattern yet. It can go into 34 times, which gives you 28, which leaves you with 2. It can go into 22 times, which gives you 14, which equals 6. Oh, okay, so now we have to look at, have I seen this 6 before? Well, yes, I saw the 6 here. It was 60, and then it's probably going to start repeating from here. So it goes in to 60 8 times, which gives you 56, which leaves you with 4. Oh, well, that's also the same here. So at the 8, it's going to start repeating. So this would give you 1.857142, and then it'll start repeating again from the 8. So I've just made this smaller, so I have space to do my next ones. If I have 56 out of 73, I know that this one is going to be less than 1, right? And I might not know multiples for this, right? It's going to be a little bit trickier. So how many times does 73 go into 570? Well, I know that 7 goes into 57 about 8 times. So I might just check what 73 times 8 is. So that's 24, 56 plus 2 is 58. Nope, that's too big. So I'm just going to do 73 times 7. That'll give me 21. 49 plus 2 is 51. So that's 511. It goes in 7 times. That leaves me with 59. Okay, well, how many times can it go into 590? Oh, well, I've already got 8 groups is 584. So when I get rid of that, this leaves me with 6. Can it go into 60? No. Can it go into 600? Yeah, it can go in 8 times, which leaves me with 584. And I can subtract from here, so that leaves me with 16. So how many times can it go into 160? I'm guessing about 2. Yeah, that looks right to me. 146. It's It's about 14. So 140, it'll be more than less than two groups. So as we can see, we're going to keep going, but we can even just look at the first few digits and work with what we have here. So I'm then going to calculate 4/5. Well, 4/5, I know that if I multiply that by 2 over 2, it's going to give me 8 out of 10, which is 0.8. So now I can start looking at these decimals. So I have 0.83 repeating, 1.857142, and that repeats. I have 0.78, and it's going to keep going, and 0.8. So the smallest one is actually 0.78, right? Everywhere else, the smallest tenths digit is an 8. So my smallest, they asked me to go from greatest to least. So my biggest fraction is the one that's more than 1, 13 out of 7, right? Then I have to go between 0.83 repeating and 0.8. Well, 0.8 would have a whole bunch of zeros after it, and this would keep having 3s. So actually it's 5/6, that's the next biggest, and then we would get 4/5. And our smallest fraction is 56 out of 73. Question 4 asks you to compare each fraction and decimal by writing them as fractions with a common denominator. So my first step is to turn 0.57 into a fraction. So my numerator would be 57, and for my denominator, there's 2 places after the decimal, so I need 2 zeros in the denominator. So this would be 57 out of 100. Now, I can't divide 57 and 100 by the same thing. So instead, I'm going to try and move 3/5 to get it to become a fraction with a denominator of 100. So to get from 5 to 100, I need to multiply it by 20, which means I'd also need to multiply 3 by 20, which would give me 60. This makes it fairly easy to tell that, okay, 60 is bigger than 57, so 3/5 is bigger than 0.57. Question B asks you to compare each fraction and decimal from part A by writing the fraction as a decimal. So we're going to look at one again. So we have 0.57 and 3/5. This time, instead of making them both fractions, we're making them both decimals. So 0.57 won't change, and 3/5, if we multiply that by 2, is going to give us 6 out of 10, which becomes 0.6. So when you're comparing this, you would have to remember that we need to also include an extra 0 after, so we're comparing 57 hundredths to 60 hundredths. And then yes, once again, 3/5 is the larger number. Part C asks you whether you prefer the method that you used in part A, where you turn them both into fractions with a common denominator, or whether you preferred the method in part B. There's no correct answer to this, it's just what is your preference, and you have to also be able to explain why. Which one do you find easier? Now for question 5, I'm going to start showing you some quicker ways to do things using your calculator. So this asks which of these 3 fractions is closest to 1/2. Now, they're all about 1 off, right? So half of 11 would actually be 5.5, but they have 6, so they added half. Half of 45 would be 22.5, so this is a half more. Half of 21 would be 10.5. This is a half more. So you can either think about the size of pieces, or you could do division. So to start with, we could look at the size of pieces. Which one of these will have the bigger piece? So if you divided the same rectangle into 11 pieces, would they be bigger than if you divided that same rectangle into 45? Well, if we look, yes, 11 looks like it has the bigger pieces. So the smaller your denominator, the bigger the pieces. So that means this one here probably has the smallest pieces. So you'd only be missing a tiny little half from that half as opposed to like half of one of these ones. So this would be your closest one. But you could also just use a calculator and go, okay, I'm going to type in my numerator divided by my denominator and see what number that gets me. So if you were to type in 6 divided by 11, you would get 0.54, and the 5 and 4 would be repeating. If you were to type in 23 divided by 45 into your calculator, you would get 0.51, and the 1 would be repeating. If you were to put 11 divided by 21, you would get 0.52380952, and it's going to keep going. So if we look at these, which one is the closest to 0.5, which is what half equals? It would be 23 out of 45. So once again, this is our closest fraction. Question 6 is trying to show us a concept. They say 0.24 is close to 0.25, which we can see they're 1/100th off. So a fraction close to 0.24 is 1/4. And the reason they're using this is because it's equivalent to 0.25. So they want you to write a fraction that's close to each of the numbers they give you. If I were to just look at A, I could go, okay, 0.52. That's pretty close to like 0.5, which is half. So I might say half would be a fraction that's close to 0.52. So for each of them, come up with a decimal that you know the fraction it's related to that is close to this number. Question 7 asks you to use a calculator to write each fraction as a decimal. So this is the same strategy that I showed you earlier in question 5a. So all I'm going to do is remind you, when you're using your calculator, you type in your numerator divided by your denominator, and the answer will be in decimal form, and that is the decimal that you will get from the fraction. So just convert this way. So you do 8 divided by 13, 9 divided by 11. Whatever they give you is the decimal. For part B, they ask you to order the fractions from least to greatest.